A roamer over this whole world over.
And the therapist. We have mentioned several times, and we'll be mentioning over and over again, those 4 words. What upholds your existence?
As happy as me, you'll never see.
Topic, including so many famous sayings about death. And I thought it would be appropriate to just mention some of them, because I'm sure some of them you've heard from time to time, but when you get them one after the other, they kind of awaken certain things. Shakespeare, all that live must die, passing through nature to eternity. Martin Luther, every man must do 2 things alone. He must do his own believing and his own dying. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, when a great person dies, for years the light they leave behind lies on the paths of men. Socrates, the hour of departure has arrived and we go our ways. I to die and you to live, which is better? God only knows. Martin Luther King, if a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Marcus Cicero, the life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living. Plato, no one knows whether death, which people fear to be the greatest evil, may not be the greatest good. And now some less serious ones. In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. Woody Allen, it's not that I'm afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. The trouble with heart disease is that the first symptom is often hard to deal with, sudden death. Michael Phelps. Johnny Carson. For 3 days after death, hair and fingernails continue to grow, but phone calls taper off. A grave is a place where the dead are laid to await the coming of the medical student. If your time hasn't come, not even a doctor can kill you. Another Woody Allen, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. Oliver Wendell Holmes, there are 3 natural anesthetics. Sleep, fainting, and death. Groucho Marx, either he's dead or my watch has stopped. Somerset Maugham, dying is a very dull, dreary affair, and my advice to you is to have nothing to do with it. George Burns. Of course, George Burns lived to be 99, so I think he knew something about it. At my age, flowers scare me. Woody Allen. There are worse things in life than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman? Death is just nature's way of telling you to slow down. They say such nice things about people at their funerals that it makes me sad that I'm going to miss mine by just a few days. Mark Twain, the report of my death was an exaggeration. I don't mind dying. The trouble is you feel so bloody stiff the next day. Jimi Hendrix, it's funny how most people love the dead. Once you're dead, you've made it for life. Death is not the end. There remains the litigation over the estate. My Uncle Sammy was an angry man. He had printed on his tombstone, "What are you looking at?" Phyllis Diller, she died recently, I think at about the age of 95, 96 also. I'd love to slit my mother-in-law's corsets and watch her spread to death. Woody Allen again. On the plus side, death is one of the few things that can be done as easy as lying down. Picasso was a delightful, kindly, friendly, simple little man. When I met him, he was extremely excited and overjoyed that his mother-in-law had just died, and he was looking forward to the funeral. George Burns again. I'm very pleased to be here. Let's face it, at my age, I'm very pleased to be anywhere. My luck is so bad that if I bought a cemetery, people would stop dying. My grandmother was a very tough woman. She buried 3 husbands, and 2 of them were just napping. When I came back to Dublin, I was court-martialed in my absence and sentenced to death in my absence, so I said they could shoot me in my absence. Brendan Behan. The court was not previously aware of the prisoner's many accomplishments. In view of these, we see fit to impose the death penalty. When you've told someone that you've left them a legacy, the only decent thing to do is die at once. That's pretty much some of the many of them, of course. I also, apropos of this, without even realizing it, my dear friends Neil and Lee sent me this, and some of you may have seen or heard about it, titled, When a Neurosurgeon Found Himself in a Coma, He Experienced Things He Never Thought Possible, A Journey to the Afterlife. And this is now a book, and it's been very well received. And it's a rather remarkable story about a neurosurgeon who didn't believe in flights of fancy about soul and incarnation and reincarnation and all of that stuff, but who experienced complete death. In fact, he says, on the morning of my 7th day in the hospital, as my doctors weighed whether to discontinue treatment, my eyes popped open. There is no scientific explanation for the fact that while my body lay in coma, my mind, my conscious inner self, was alive and well. While the neurons of my cortex were stunned to complete inactivity by the bacteria that had attacked them, my brain, free consciousness, journeyed to another larger dimension of the universe, a dimension I'd never dreamed existed, and which the old pre-coma me would have been more than happy to explain with a simple impossibility. But that dimension, in rough outline, the same one described by countless subjects of near-death experiences and other mystical states in there, it exists, and what I saw and learned there has placed me quite literally in a new world, a world where we are much more than our brains and bodies, and where death is not the end of consciousness, but rather a chapter in a vast and incalculable positive journey. I'm not the first person to have discovered evidence that consciousness exists beyond the body. Brief, wonderful glimpses of that realm are as old as human history. But as far as I know, no one before me has ever traveled to this dimension while their cortex was completely shut down and while their body was under minute medical observation, as mine was for the full 7 days of my coma. And he goes on to explain various things that he experienced in this state, including, without using any words, she, an entity, spoke to me. The message went through me like a wind, and I instantly understood that it was true. I knew so in the same way that I knew that the world around me, around us, was real, was not some fantasy passing and unsubstantial. The message had 3 parts, and if I had to translate them into earthly language, I'd say they ran something like this. You are loved and cherished dearly forever. You have nothing to fear. There is nothing you can do wrong. The message flooded me with a vast and crazy sensation of relief. It was like being handed the rules to a game I'd been playing all of my life without ever fully understanding it. So if you're interested in finding out more about this, it's Dr. Eben Alexander, and it's quite a remarkable story. Of course, there are people who can counter that and say, well, it's all after the fact. You know, you say this, but how do we know it wasn't just a fantasy that you came up with afterward, as it might be with thousands of other people, millions of other people. But certainly, as you remember when we were talking about life, love, UFOs, and other things, and we discussed various things that people had experienced, whether it be UFOs, out-of-body experiences, ghosts, etc., and so on. It's certainly more than food for thought as we go along, and as we get older and older, of course, it becomes more and more prominent, and I think that I'm in a position now at my age, having experienced so much about death, especially in recent years, that I've got a pretty clear objective sense of what I'm feeling about it and how occupied I am or I am not. And I think that increases with age to some degree, that you just become more familiar with it, because as you age, more and more people that you know are dying off. And the other thing that you experience, that everyone, as they get older, says, in one way or the other, doesn't time go by so much faster? It really does. I don't think it's time itself that's going by so much faster. I think that we are that much more aware of how precious time is and how we want to do things. And we only have so much time. So, preparing for death, an adventure or a terrifying experience. I thought it would be good to just have each of us briefly go through our own minds and think about what we truly feel and think about death at this point in our lives. What is our general attitude? What are the feelings that we have? How do we feel about it? What are our earliest memories about death? When did it happen? Were you frightened by death? Did it have a lasting effect? Did you personalize it? Were you aware that it happens to everyone? Did you want to talk about it? Was there someone to talk to? As you grew older, did you develop any attitudes about death and dying? Now, those things can be separate. Your own personal thing about death and dying, as like the Woody Allen, it doesn't happen to me. How often have you experienced the death of others? Family, friends, pets, strangers, known personalities, tragedies, movies, and books? How do you feel and think about it now? Is it on your mind often? Anyone want to take a shot at that, Barbara?
Worked in the hospital field for 45 years and was around death a lot. And I found that when someone suffers from a disease, a long-term type thing, oftentimes you grieve ahead of time, so that when the person does pass on, it's like, it's a blessing when it actually happens. I happen to have a feeling of faith that there is, I'm going to see all those people I lost ahead of time once I go. I do not fear death. I'm not planning on doing it anytime soon, but I don't fear death, and a lot of people do fear death. Now, my husband was a lot older than I was. He was 93 when he died, and he was petrified of death, and I think he was petrified of death because he'd done some things during his life that probably weren't the best things to his children. I think he felt a lot of guilt, and until he was able to feel some faith, because he didn't really believe in a God, it was really hard for him to go. He felt a tremendous amount of guilt, and I think he was very worried about what was going to be on the other side. Once he finally healed with his children, he was able to go in peace. And so, like I say, if you have a faith that there is something of peace beyond this, you can catch up with those young people that you lost. It is the only explanation that I can accept, is that I'm going to see them later down the road. That is the only way I really handle death, is that I'm going to see them later on down the road.
Someone else?
I'll share. My earliest memory, my mom died when I was 9, and she was sick with MS, and she died. The preparation for my sister and I, my sister was 11, I was 9. We didn't know she was going to die. She was sick. We went and saw her at the hospitals and the rest homes, and we went through her illness, but we didn't know. And I woke up one morning and my grandma was there, and I thought, oh, that was kind of weird. And they said, your mom's dead, go to school. So that was an interesting way of handling a 9-year-old. I'm not frightened. I wasn't frightened there. I knew that it was forever. I think it's messed up that that's how we were told, and that's, you know, because I really didn't know. But I did go through, I was adopted, so it was my adopted mom. Doesn't matter, she's still my mom, but I actually did personalize her death when she passed at 42. When I hit 42, I thought, wow, that, you know, that's the age that she went. And you know, you do kind of think, am I going, even not biologically related to her, you kind of think that. Fortunately, my adopted dad passed at 86, so I've got a little bit more time if I want to hang on to that. I've had so many people in my life pass, friends and tragic. I had one, my daughter's good friend, her mother, father, and little brother died carbon monoxide poisoning. And, you know, pets, the best thing that happened to me with one of my pets was the vet told me, remember the days you had and not today. So that helped. But I believe also that I will see everybody, I personally believe this is hell, and that this is our learning area and our growth area, and we're all signed up for the classes and the lessons, and this is what we're doing right now here, and that when we pass, it's a better place, and someplace that we'll go, oh, that's why that, you know, happened, or that's why, you know, you went through that. So that's where I'm at.
I've got a similar story. My mother died when I was 11, and my father, who was Scandinavian, never took us to the hospital after she had had a seizure and was in a coma. And so we never saw her in the hospital. There was never a transition between this very abrupt act and the funeral. He was, you know, heads down guy. Okay, we've got new tasks that we've got to allocate to everybody, and we're going to move on, and we're going to get through this okay. So although he's a very loving man, we didn't deal with the emotional side of the grief and the loss at all. And as a result, it very much affected me and how you deal with grief, loss, separation, and it's really only been in my adult years that I've realized that has affected me deeply, and that I've got a whole lot of catching up to do on the grieving process. Loss is big and little that we all suffer throughout our lives, and I think it's only through dealing with those losses in a real time, in a straightforward fashion, facing into our pain and our fear or whatever else, that we can then go on and continue to make each day a work of art. And just recently I lost a good friend who was a teammate, and she had had a brain tumor for 1.5 years. And one of her last big actions was that she wanted to complete a ride that we were doing down in Tahoe, and that she had been training for and riding in honor of her daughter. And so we organized to have a special bike available that was a recumbent, so that even though she had lost her balance and some of the function in one of her arms, she was still able to do the ride. And it was powerful. It was really amazing. And she gave a talk after the ride. She had been named the most inspirational rider, and this talk was put on YouTube, and it's just amazing. Even though the tumor affected her speech, and you know, some of her words were slurred, she was so eloquent, and the fact that she really seemed to accept her death, and that she was dealing and coping with it it was really inspirational. And you know, she was an example to me for how you can deal with and prepare for death, both in her own place, but then also her family, and trying to prepare her family for the life after her and after she was gone.
When you were talking, it reminded me of something that Yul Brynner did. You've heard me mention Yul Brynner as the actor who was, of course, famous for the role in The King and I, both on Broadway and in the movies. He did something rather remarkable. He was dying, and he taped a very special program for smokers. And it begins with him, in the close-up, as I recall, saying, by the time you are able to view this video of me, I will be dead as a result of smoking. And it was very, very powerful. But it was wonderful that he took it upon himself to do that in that way. The idea of someone being so aware of giving to others and doing good for others at that point, I think, is especially meaningful. So I find that really important. Somebody else?
Well, I'm really not sure where to go with this. Well, okay, the first thing that came to mind when I heard the topics about death is, you know, a friend of mine directed me to read some books by Carlos Castaneda. And yeah, in that, the main character tells Castaneda that he thinks that, you know, basically the problem with people nowadays is that they just act like they're going to live forever. They don't have a sense of death, and so he wants the main character to sort of, you know, have a relationship with this sort of, or almost personified death on a, you know, kind of daily basis. You know, just to be aware of his own mortality. And so, you know, he basically, so he'll get his act together and, you know, make it every day a work of art, that kind of thing.
Somebody else?
I haven't had anyone real close to me die. I've had, you know, 3 of my grandparents die, and you know, some other people that I've known. And I remember being surprised that after my last grandmother died, I didn't feel a lot of grief, and like I was supposed to have. I didn't really talk about that to anybody, but I just remember feeling that like I don't feel like I thought I was supposed to feel, you know. And I've known a few people that have died from cancer, and I had some feelings of anger because I don't think they needed to. You know, I think there's more that people could have done, and so it kind of made me angry. Some people that died, you know, in their 50s, early 60s, and I don't think that needed to happen, you know. Oh, in terms of my own death, I'm not ready, and I'm not ready at all, and that's how I feel about it. I have a lot of things I wanted to do, and but even at this point, I feel like I'm not even living my life the way I want to be living it. If I was at least doing everything I wanted to be doing, I might, you know, be a little bit more okay with the idea of death, I think. So I think that definitely plays a big part of it. Yeah.
Sandy?
So similarly, I have not had anybody really close to me die. My father passed away, but you know, they had been out of my life as far as they were off RVing full time and you know, knowing Dad for years, and we're living in Florida, and so when he passed, you know, it wasn't like, it didn't impact me as far as my life, you know, like I'm not seeing him every day. There wasn't a hole in my life, so to speak, and there wasn't a hole in my heart so much either, because I believe in afterlife, and I believe that we have a choice to either reincarnate and continue to learn more, or to go on to something else. So I was surprised at how I wasn't real disturbed. I was actually relieved that he passed on after his aneurysm burst in a stroke, because you know, it was going to be really hard for him. He couldn't feed himself, couldn't do anything. I actually think he chose to go rather than to stay, and I actually have that belief that we choose, and I feel we choose when we're going to go. And I know a lady had breast cancer for 20 years. So, you know, I just, the most closest, well, pets, when pets die, it's real hard for me, because they're in my life and they're every day, like my little kid. But recently I had a spiritual leader at my church die of cancer in the brain, and he had beat it for 5 years, and then he had suffered a really strong betrayal from a really close friend, and I think that he just gave up again. I really do. And in going through, you know, because they knew he was dying, and it was kind of a process of a couple of months before he actually passed, and the church had a celebration of his life while he was living, and we knew it was pretty much the last time we were going to see him, unless we wanted to go see him, you know, in a month or two, decline the hospice and whatnot. And my belief is that it's a good, you know, it's a choice, and it's not a bad thing. But I was having a hard time not crying, and everybody's celebrating. If I looked in his eyes and the love in his eyes, I'd just start crying. I want to cry now, and I think that to me is the loss of that connection in this presence right now is for me the grief. You know, I know he's in a better place. Like you say, this is kind of hell. This is where the love really isn't. I mean, it's for us to create or to experience or to get through, you know, to learn. But
Question that is often raised: what should we feel when someone dies? I remember the first time I experienced death, as I can recall, I was about 6. I lived in a tenement in New York City, and it was all a whole row of tenements. And as much as this was New York City with thousands and thousands of people living in one block, you knew pretty much everyone, and knew about everyone. And we know that the person next door was a janitor, a woman in her 60s, who was rather unusual, and that she kept what must have been about 20 dogs in her basement with her. And one day there was sirens and commotion. I went out in the street, and the police cars were there, and ambulance was there, and everyone was talking about they'd found her dead, you know, and the dogs were all howling, and the ASPCA came, and it was just, you know, all of this going on at once. And then, in the midst of this, there was a rumor spreading that the police had found $500,000 underneath her bed. So it went from the excitement to the, to the commotion to, oh, what was she doing with $500,000? How did she get it? And I remember the whole thing just surprised me. I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. And as I watched this whole thing going on, I think I was more moved by the dogs than anything else for whatever reason. And I didn't question it. I didn't feel any sense of guilt about that. The next major thing I experienced was my father's death. He was only 47 and he died of cancer, Hodgkin's, but that was just the symptom. He really died of a broken spirit more than anything else, and the inability to express what he was feeling, and I think pain about his older son, my brother Marco. And that was a very strange thing because I had seen him the night before he died at Kings County Hospital, and he knew he was dying. And I sat with him alone, and I've shared some of this with you in the past, and he simply held my hand and he said two things. One, take care of your mother, and two, remember always that misery loves company. And I wasn't quite sure what he meant. I was 14 at the time, but I knew it was important enough for him to say it, and he wasn't a philosopher by nature. He was a cook. And I left him and went home and listened to the radio and got to sleep pretty late. And here's where something important really happened that had a deep effect on my life. I was asleep and suddenly I woke up with a tremendous pain in my chest. It was unlike any pain I've ever felt. It wasn't like being hit, and I've been hit in my chest in boxing enough times, and I felt asthmatic attacks when I was suffering from asthma. But this was just a general pain just throughout the whole chest that was, and I remember getting up feeling this, and I had a clock by my bed, and I looked at it, and it was exactly 8:39 in the morning. And the pain stayed with me for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I went back to sleep, and I got up again about 10:30 because we were scheduled, my mother and I were going to the hospital to see my father again. And we took the subway to Kings County Hospital, and we walked through the corridors, and a nurse came out and saw my mother, and she asked me to just wait outside while she spoke to my mother, and she took my mother inside, and a moment later I heard my mother shriek. And then the nurse came out and told me that my father had died. And I looked at her and said, when? And she said, she took out the chart and said 8:39 this morning. Not that I was surprised, I pretty much expected it. And the rest of the day was very strange in that my mother was hysterical. I don't know what I felt. I felt kind of removed from the whole thing, and I certainly loved my father. I didn't know what to feel or think. So I sat in the living room and turned on the television, and it was October 3rd, 1951, the day of the famous playoff game between the Giants and Dodgers, and it's called the shot that heard round the world when Bobby Thompson hit the home run to win the pennant for the Giants. And I sat there watching Bobby Thompson come up, and I was a great baseball fan, and although I was a Yankee fan, they were in another league. The Dodgers were playing the Giants. It was a final playoff game, and Bobby Thompson hit the home run, and I jumped up and was excited. At the same time, my mother was in the other room screaming, and the juxtaposition of the two things just caught me suddenly. I'm watching Bobby Thompson rounding the bases, and again, it's one of the most famous, I think it's considered one of the 2 or 3 most famous moments in baseball history. And he's running around the bases, jumping up and down, and the fans are going crazy. And I'm watching that, and I want to keep watching it, but I'm listening to my mother crying hysterically, and I didn't know what to feel or what to think. I think I was more stunned than anything else. And I don't know if it was death that stunned me, any more than it was life that stunned me with Bobby Thompson's home run. But every October 3rd, they always mention it in sports, and I'm always reminded of my father's death that day as well. After that, all I remember is a lot of rage, going to the funeral with all of the Greek relatives coming, and the ritual is that you go by the coffin and you kiss the forehead of the departed. And I wanted to kill a lot of the people that were there, because many of them were responsible for my father's death. And in fact, swore to kill 2 of them. But that was my first real direct, strong contact in a personal way with death. And to this day, I haven't got it all explained. I don't, for the life of me, have it explained. Sometimes it's a shocker. Sometimes I feel something, grief you might call it. Sometimes I just wonder. I had a very close friend, a man named George Shangro. Some of you might have heard of George Shangro. He was at one time the voice of King FM, and he conducted the Seattle Symphony for many, many years, so he was frequently on television. And he died a couple of years ago. He was driving in the rain, and he got to an intersection, and he stopped, red light, and someone crossed the intersection. A 16-year-old boy didn't stop and just came right through the light and ran right into his car, killed him instantly. And when I heard about that, I was shocked, and I personalized that a lot because I knew George, and he had a great feeling for life. He loved to conduct, and I identified with him because of my love for conducting. And then my brother's death happened suddenly to me. I opened an envelope in my hallway from the tax department in Los Angeles. I couldn't figure out, I looked at the tax department. I haven't been in Los Angeles in 22 years. What was the tax department in Los Angeles writing me about? And I opened it, and I see it's about Marco Crocodinas, deceased. And I felt a great deal. I went upstairs, and Nan was asleep, and I just sat in a chair beside her, and I wasn't going to wake her. I didn't want to wake her with this news. But I've gone through probably more grief about my brother's death than any other person in my life. I guess because there was so much unresolved. And I think that's an important part of it also. Where there is regret and so much that is unresolved, you wish that had been more of an opportunity to have done something. Preparations. Writing a will. It's foolish not to write a will, even if you're young, because you could, get hit by a car. The tsunami could hit you, something could hit you, could suddenly happen. And what you should be aware of, why it's so important, is that you don't want excuse me, to set family up for a lot of problems. If there's no will, there can be so many problems. Just so you know it, I don't know if anyone here has gone through probate and estate type things, but it's a long, dragged out affair. My brother's estate was not complicated because I was the only heir. There was no one else. And he didn't leave a will. But it took 1.5 years to settle everything. And the lawyer I worked with, I was very fortunate. I had a great lawyer. And I'm not a lawyer lover, as you probably know. But this was a real wonderful gal who did a wonderful job, very efficient, caring, knew what she was doing from point one right through the end of it. And still, it took 1.5 years. It would have been a lot easier had there been a will. A lot of decisions had to be made without that, and it's more complicated, much more complicated. So you owe it to yourself and to loved ones to write a will. It's a foolish mistake that many people make. Have you, anyone here thought about that recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a will, like I say, working in the hospital, you know, all your time. Plus, I went through that with my father's estate. And my stepmother was in a nursing home and ate up $1 million of what my dad had left, living in this nursing home. Now, it was controlled by a manager who was not, he wasn't responsible to any of us. He had complete reign, complete control, and it was devastating for the rest of us because we had no way to prove whether any of that $1 million went in his pocket. It really caused a lot of disappointment within the family that nothing came down from my dad's estate from that amount of money that he had, very little of it. And my poor stepmother was a vegetable in a nursing home. They even called us and said, would you like us to put in a feeding tube when she started to get bad? And she was 93 years old, Alzheimer's, in a nursing home. Did we want to put in a feeding tube? That's when he finally contacted one of the family members, and no. This woman has, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. So yeah, it isn't fun going through that sort of stuff. But I also encourage everybody, they don't like to talk about death, but the best thing that you can do as an individual is let your family know how you would like things done when you die. Mm-hmm. If you have it written out, it makes it so much easier for whoever is left.
It is a whole different process, procedure, reality when you don't have instructions, details, and it puts people through a lot of changes. So it's not something you should put off. Most people put it off because they figure, well, I got a long time. My brother put it off all along. At his memorial service, a lady came up to me who knew him, had been a member of his sailing club, and said, just 2 weeks before he died, I saw him and I said, Marco, have you written out your will at least? And he just brushed me aside and said, no, no, no. And 2 days before he died, the nurse who was at the ceremony also came up to me and she said, I asked him if there was a phone number or a name, someone, an emergency, a contact, and he said, no, no, Bob, no. Consequently, a year and a half of work, and I've got a stack of papers there this high with all the details, and just so you know how much is entailed if you are in that position, you're talking about taking on what is close to another full-time job for a year and a half. I kid you not. I'm talking about 30, 35 hours a week, especially the first 8 to 10 months on the paperwork and all the details. Don't just assume it's no big deal, you'll die and someone will take care of it. It doesn't work that way. So be fair to yourself and to everyone that you care about. Write out a will, let there be details about what you want, because it's just the right way of doing it. And very few people do it that way. Very few people take the time to do it. I mentioned my dear friends Peg and Brent, Peg's mother, who was one of the wisest people I've ever known in my life, because number one, and it's related to this as well, she had emphysema. She'd been a very heavy smoker, and at the time she was now, may see, 65, 66, and she had a condo in Nanaimo, Victoria, British Columbia, and she sold it and figured out exactly how much money she would need for about another 20 years of living, and figured out all her expenses, including funeral expenses, and she did something that surprised everyone. She actually arranged for a casket that was really elaborate with flowers and beautiful embroidery and everything else, and everyone got a huge kick out of it at the end that she had surprised everyone. She kept this as a surprise for everyone. But she gave away all the money she didn't need. She didn't put it in trust or in a will. She knew that, you know, the grandchildren, the rest, the cousins, and needed the money then. Why wait until then? Which is a real sticking point in my way of thinking. And she's the only person who was wise enough to do it that way. It was really became a model for me in terms of if you are really caring and loving, rather than to dangle the money and keep it, you know. My mother hid it away under the carpet in security boxes, and my wife's father, you know, we got an inheritance after he died, and I was angry as hell. I wanted, Murray, why didn't you take some of that money and take your grandchildren on a trip somewhere, do something with it? What good did it have after the fact? It's always after the fact. That's not necessary. And the wonderful equation about that, which I really believe in deeply, when Peg's mom, Grandma Peg, passed on, for the week and a half before it, everyone was there with her. They all shared it with her. It was a celebration. Everyone was there, right up to the last moment. And it was wonderful. And they didn't have to wait for the reading of a will or any of that nonsense, who gets what. They'd been doled out to them, you know, 20 years before, and they had the benefit of it. My brother, on the other hand, of course, keeping everything locked away to himself, who was there with him? Nobody. He dies alone. The cleaning lady discovers him. So you should look at all of these things and, you know, project ahead, you know, think carefully. Don't get caught in the trap of doing what everyone else does. I'm constantly reminding people, because everyone's model, you know, the misery love company thing works here, is put it in trust. Put it in trust for your children. Don't give it now. And yeah, of course it's crap. But not only that, but what they also telling themselves, and other people will tell them, is, well, you may need it yourself. Don't do it now. Don't give it away now. What, you may need it. I heard my mother, I called my mother from Greece. We were living in Greece. And I'm on the phone with her one day, and she's sounding very desperate, and I didn't know what it was about. And she's saying, I want you to come home. I have money for you, in a trust fund for you. And what? And I hear the voice, the woman who'd been living with her, say, no, Stella, don't do it. Don't do it, Stella. Don't do it. You need it. And then she said, oh, yeah, and she said, I'll call you back. And, of course, she never called me back about that. And then after, you know, she died, we found out all about this madness, hiding money. I had signed over my military disability check 35, 40 years earlier. Get a check every month from the government. I just had it sent direct to her. When I went through her apartment, guess what? All those checks were there, hidden in boxes, underneath the linoleum, hundreds of checks. You know, it was, I sat there, I couldn't believe it. And yet she acted as if she was penniless. So you really have to think carefully about, you know, what your possessions are and what the meaning is and what you believe in and the way you're going to handle it, because it can be brutally painful for other people, or it can be exciting and positive, as it was for Grandma Peg. She made it a wonderful thing for everyone, and that's the way it should be. So when we closed probate and everything else, a week later we wrote out checks for our 4 children. Absolutely. Well, I'm not going to play that game of, you know, wait until we've passed on. They need the money now. What are you waiting for? How will you settle your estate? Will you tell everyone in advance? Will you share it? Or will you do this cockamamie dumb thing of keeping it all closed, you know, dangling it there, you know, that maybe you're going to get something, you know, after they pass? I think there's an inherent kind of warning there of behave, you know. You just might get something if you behave. And that does happen to a lot of people. A lot of bitterness within families I've experienced over the years about who gets what and how it's divvied up. And it need not be. It's like so many other things that could be prevented. if we only used common sense. Dividing your assets, property, money, stocks, bonds, personal things. Yeah, be aware of what it is you've gotten, the way you're going to handle it, and who's going to get it, and share the ideas with people. Also, give them the opportunity of knowing they might have different thoughts than you have. They might say, hey, I don't really care about the car so much, but that, watch that, you've had for 40 years that Grandma gave you, I'd like to have that, Now, maybe there'll be some conflicts there, but you get it out in the open, you talk about it, rather than wait until it's over and then you've got the lawyers at each other's throats, trying to figure it out for you. I've seen that happen so many times with people where they end up with nothing but huge bitterness and conflicts because lawyers are involved in everything else that should have been done cleanly and easily rather than letting it go that way.
It also puts you in a position of, you're grieving this person's gone, but wow, I got $100,000, so it's hard to be excited about that because that could introduce a lot of guilt,
It can, depending on the situation. For Nan and I, it was a strange thing. My brother and I never got along, as you've heard me talk about my relationship with my brother Marco. I loved him very much, but we had huge conflicts. And I think that had he been aware enough, wise enough to write out a will, he would have given everything to dog catchers in New Zealand. He wouldn't have left anything to me. So I got it all, The irony of that.
Yeah.
I respect. And you know what? Nan and I laugh about it. Well, yes, we laugh about it. And I also think, jumping ahead, karma is involved here. Because when I stopped laughing and I thought about it, and I said, I wonder why it ended up this way. Because he would not have chosen to give anything to me. I get it all, and what's involved? And I suddenly realized there's karma involved. A lot of it because, among other things, those checks I told you about, disability checks and everything else, they were, and the allotment checks I gave my mother. My brother was 3 years old when my father died. He hightailed it, gone. I had to work until 1 o'clock every night, had no life of my own for all those years going through school, absolutely no teenage life. I did the work to support myself and my mother, and even when I went to the military, I made sure that half of the money went to my mother. My brother wouldn't do anything. So I think he ended up having to pay off some karma. And I don't feel bad about thinking of it that way. I believe karma exists. I think we have to be responsible for our actions, and that one way or another, we are going to own up to it, whether we like it or not. And the strange one on Marco was that I ended up getting it all. So, I smile at it. I have no guilt about it whatsoever. I really don't. Putting things in order is another area that's really vitally important. Seeing people for the last time, covering all your bases, leaving nothing hanging or in doubt, and no burdens for others. Just common sense, just common sense tells you that there's a way to do it, and you should do it that way.
And as you say, we should, okay, what's the quote? Live every day as if it's your last, because one of these days you're going to be right.
Yeah.
So every day, every time I see my kids, I tell them how much I love them, because you never know what's going to happen.
No, we never do know.
Yeah, no regrets.
No. The biggest thing of all is to not have regrets. Deal with that area of it. It's so... My father had no regrets when he passed on. That's why he was peaceful. He had hurt no one knowingly. He was an honest, hard-working human being, loved his family, unlike so many other relatives who were rats and thieves, basically. And he forgave them. He forgave everyone. He did not pass his last night with bitterness toward those people who had done so many wrongs to him. No regrets is certainly a key factor in all of this. Final arrangements. Burial or cremation, where, how, when. I didn't know what to do when I found out about my brother's death. He had been lying in the morgue for over a month and a half because it took them that long to find out where I was. They finally contacted his ex-wife who had our address, and she had not been for her, I don't know what would have happened on the long run. But when I finally found out, I had to make a decision then what to do. And the decision, luckily, was pretty clear. He was a sailor. He loved sailing. That was his life, basically, the last 10 years of his life. And even his ex-wife said he would probably want to be buried at sea, you know, cremated and buried at sea. So we did that. So I was happy that me and my son Billy were, and we had the memorial service. We had 30 people on the boat. And it was important. We're getting some music for the memorial ceremony now too. It's backing it up. On cue, on cue at the right time. It's perfect timing.
I like that.
Mark always said, yes, he liked it too.
But you want to take care of those arrangements. You don't want to leave it up in the air so people don't know what to do. It's costly also. It's a lot cheaper to cremate than to bury. But that may not be a factor, or it may be a factor, but it's something to consider.
And when you do know what they want, honor what they wanted, and don't have this great big fancy funeral which they didn't want, just so you look cool.
Yep. Yep. Write your epitaph. What wisdom, philosophy will you leave behind? Well, I thought it might be good for us to do that now. So let's close our eyes, or keep them open if you want, and just let's spend a minute or two thinking about what would we write as our epitaph. Whether you want to put it on your tombstone, if you're going to have a tombstone or not, is up to you. But what's the final kind of message that you want to leave behind? The reason we're so quiet now is we're writing our epitaph. So get yourself back seated. And, no, don't. Get yourself seated and write your own epitaph now. What do you want to leave behind? Just as I looked up famous sayings about death, I'm sure that had I looked up famous epitaphs, there would have been some corkers out there. Have you ever gone through a cemetery? Walked through a cemetery and seen what's written on the tombstone? Some hilarious stuff, some very profound stuff. It's an experience, nothing sad about it by and large. And of course I could remind you that question that Piers Morgan asked the British actor, to write his epitaph, and he said at the end, he said, "Oh, I've got it." That's what he said. What's it all about? That's why we named this series, What's It All About? Anyone ready with theirs? Hard one, huh?
What's yours?
Mine is not guilty. I don't know why, but that's what came to me. Not guilty. I don't want to write anything profound or flowery. I've pretty much said all of my piece over the years, to people individually and in classes and in books. So I'm going to make it kind of simple. Not guilty. Anyone? Barbara?
She did her best to make the world a more loving place.
That's good enough.
Seize the day.
Huh?
I said seize the day.
Seize the day. All right. You'd think after a lifetime we'd have something much greater, but it can be simple, Do you believe in an afterlife, reincarnation, karma, the soul? How have these things affected your life? How will it affect your death? Well, of course, we talked about that in an earlier class. So much of what we do in life is going to determine how we go about dying. And if we let that hang, and I think most people do, most people that speak about are kind of a bit either confused or up in the air, or not quite certain, they not so much about what they believe in, but how that really affects their lives and what to do about their beliefs. How do you incorporate that into your living situation? It's fine to say, I believe in some force, some power, I believe in an afterlife, I believe in soul, but is that really moving you to the point where you're doing something with it in your actions during the course of your life? And I fail to see that happening with most people. I see it as being more of a philosophical thing with people than a practical lifestyle. I think if we really believed in half of the things we say we believed in, we'd be different people. No? We wouldn't be driving the cars the way we're driving cars. We wouldn't be nasty the way we're nasty. We wouldn't be so concerned with material goods. We'd be different people. And certainly if we believe that there is an afterlife, that we're going on from here, that should affect our actions every single day, every moment of our lives. And certainly be directly connected to what we feel about death. So, yeah, it's something we all have to go for. Figure it out, and where do you stand? What do you believe in? And how are you responding to that belief? As opposed to just allowing it to be a nice philosophical statement that you have.
Nickolas, how does it affect your life? How does it change how you
It relaxes me, for one thing. It makes me more aware of the importance of living every day fully. Makes me more aware of how precious time is, how much I want to accomplish in this lifetime, and what I want to carry over into the next lifetime. It affects me every single moment. I think more so, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And I have to believe in what I've experienced. As I've experienced flying saucers. I've experienced a ghost, out-of-body experience. I experienced that wake up in the morning at 8:39 with the pain in my chest, and my father died at that moment. These things have happened. So if I cannot acknowledge them, then what have I learned? I'm a damn fool. I mean, again, that's the difference between simply thinking about it, even believing, and acknowledging. The acknowledgement is the important part. Just as the commitment is more important than just making a decision. Without a commitment, your decisions are going to waver. So you have to acknowledge what it is you believe in, and then put it to work in your life. And do it aggressively if you can. Don't just talk about it as an abstract kind of thing. Will passing on be an everlasting sleep or the beginning of a new life? That's really another part of it, because there's no full awareness for each individual that it will be the same. And I thought about, I've mentioned to you that Tucker believes in the idea of calling upon the soul of a departed human being at the time you're conceiving a child. And before Nan and I conceived our first child, we talked about that and talked about various souls. And when we came to Father John, at first Nan thought, well, what about Father John? And I said, no, I knew he'd passed on to a higher plane. I knew Father John would not be coming back this way. He'd go on to another plane. So I have that belief also. There are different planes. It makes sense to me that not all of us are going to be going to the same place and experiencing the exact same things. It's going to depend on a lot of factors, including how many lives we've led and what we managed to learn, if anything, in this lifetime. How much karma we were able to take care of. So these are all things to be aware of and to think about. Going back to that idea, will we leave behind any regrets? Will the slate be clear? Are you certain that there's no unfinished business, no one left to forgive? big, big, important factors, because you can't take it back. And it's something to think about before the fact, not after the fact. I can't tell you how many people I have been with over a period of almost 50 years now, especially in group sessions and private sessions, who turned to me and just felt so awful, so filled with regret because they did not take care of those things while people were alive. They waited and waited and waited. They didn't go to those people, talk to them, work things out, confront what had to be confronted, and hopefully forgive. They didn't do it. Huge, huge mistake, which you're carrying over into your next life as well, I think. My brother, I pleaded with him in so many ways over the last 3-4 years. I'd send him gifts, and then same thing. Would call him occasionally and plead with him. Let's just talk. Let's work things out. It doesn't have to be this way. That's where ego comes in. Defensiveness, denial. The ego gets so powerful then, and that ego prevents people from settling things at the end, and then suddenly it's too late. You can't take it back, and you are left with that. And that's a mistake. That's really a huge personal mistake, to not go over that unfinished business with individuals and make sure you did everything possible. Consequently, I feel very much at ease about my relationship with my brother. Why, I have no regret, no guilt about it, including the money and everything else we got, why we're able to laugh at it. We did our best. We reached out over and over and over again. I wanted it to be settled. I can't get inside a person's body and force them to do anything. But you've got to take the initiative. You've got to make sure that you don't end up saying, well, I was waiting for them to do it. That's not going to be a satisfactory answer when the person passes and you're going to be faced with, what did I do? Why didn't I make a move? And I'm sure every one of us has situations in our life that are like that, where we're waiting, where we're not saying, okay, let's take the initiative and do something before it is too late. We owe it to ourselves and to that person or persons.
Nick, I was not close to my mother at all. As a matter of fact, I had a lot of anger against her because she never appreciated me. And it was after she died that I found out what she had gone through as a kid. And then I realized why she didn't have the tools to love me. So what got me through that was being able to talk to her up there and apologizing that I didn't know, and she never told me. So I at least was able to express those things in prayer, but I still feel badly. We could have been so much closer if she had told me what she suffered as a kid.
Often people can't. That's why I've said so often we have to recognize, even if we have a clear sense of righteousness, that we are right, we have to recognize that the other person may have a completely different perception of what happened. And there's so much, it's just like the missing scenes in a character in a play. You are playing a part of a human being, and the part is written in a play that's maybe 2 to 3 hours long, and you've only got so many details, so many facts about the character. And if the actor is a wise actor, really wants to do something special, he's going to fill in the missing scenes. He's going to find out what the rest of that person's life is about to bring to that characterization. Well, we have to do the same thing with people. We have to assume a lot of things. I had to assume a lot of things about my brother and what made him the way he was. And I understood those things. And I think, again, we've got to really bend over backwards to see the other person's perception and then take the initiative. Again, what have we got to lose to go forward and say, hey, can't we just do everything we can to talk about this, work our way through this? let's give it a shot, huh? Don't wait on it. Are you going out smiling, laughing, singing, loving, and creating? Yeah, that's the way we should go out. It should be a celebration. But it's going to be very hard to do that if you're not celebrating life to begin with. If you're not making every day a work of art, if you're not making your weeks and months and years works of art, how are you going to suddenly at the end decide to be hoop-de-doo, have fun, let's have... You're not going to want to do that. You're probably going to be pretty miserable, as so many people are. So it's a matter of working every day on all of this so that you can celebrate at the end of it, as opposed to simply going out with a lot of regrets. Who will be on hand? Will you make it a grand party and a send-off? I told you again about Grandma Peg. She had everyone there weeks before. And that sounds good to me. Well, why limit it to just one last day? Holding on to the person and being there. Why not spend a week or 2 weeks, and do all the things that you maybe never had a chance to do. Play all the music together, sing all the songs together, say all the things you want to say, and then some, rather than doing it after the fact again and suddenly realizing, I wish I had had more time to spend with them. Spend the time. Go over it carefully. Expectations. Will you be greeted in heaven by your family and friends? My dear friend Neil Selden, at least 2 or 3 times a year when he talks, reminisces about people who have passed on that he loves, he does it with a big, big smile on his face and says, I know they're waiting there for me. I know all of them are waiting there for me. And he'll look at me and say, they're waiting there for you too, Nickolas. And he's right. Now, here's another example of, don't just philosophize about it, but how do you make that part of your life? Well, you hit upon it a moment ago, Barbara. You talk about it. You talk to the person. Use hypnosis that way. Use, all the tools and concepts that way. Get in touch with those feelings and thoughts. That's why I talk to people regularly who've passed on. It's, and I am expecting them. I'm expecting a whole flock of people, not just from this life, but from a number of other lives. So if you're going to do it full blown. Why limit yourself? Enjoy it. Last moment things from each person. What do you expect when you get to wherever we're going? Any expectations?
I want to see my mother again. So much, being so young when she died, that I never really knew her. And so that is one of my expectations.
Someone else? Well,
I'm going to go up and see them all, and then I'm going to come back as a midwife next life.
all right. Okay.
Yeah, expect to see my dad. And I'm looking forward to it because I want to tell him that he really was a good dad.
Not too soon. We're not saying we want to go soon. We're just saying we're not ready to go perhaps.
I expect to be surprised at who all will be there. Almost like overwhelmed in a good way, and just like, wow, good to see you. Oh my goodness, and also for a little bit at least to have some more understanding. I don't know, but I see it as being, wow, good to see you kind of thing, but not necessarily. And I hope, there's some people I specifically hope to see, but I tend to live pessimistically to be optimistically surprised. So I don't want to say, I don't want to name any names, because I don't want to put any expectations, but there are a few that I would like to see.
Thought on that, because I remember someone once brought this up to me when I was talking about my father, and they said, well, since you believe your father already has returned, he can't be up there waiting to see you.
Mm-hmm.
but that means he is here now, so I've seen him now. So that's another possibility. They may not be there for
Right.
other reasons. They might, you know,
I don't have any expectations.
okay.
I just want to say, I believe that we're not just one-dimensional and just on this plane. I believe that we are multidimensional. So your dad might be reincarnated, and, or that your dad you're talking about, right? And he could also be there.
He did come back as my son, but he could be on another plane also. But my son has a hard time with that one. I don't remind him of it too often. That basically, you know, his old grandfather. I'm my own grandpa. That's how the song goes. Somebody else?
Well, I feel like I haven't thought about this a lot, but I guess, you know, what I have imagined is it being very different from what it is now. Like, I feel like I would fill up a big portion of the universe or something, like more abstract kind of way. I don't know.
I just want to say, I have a friend that does burial and funeral preparations for a living. And the stories he's told me about families when somebody's passed and the devastation and the arguments and the decisions and the tapping out of everybody's, I mean, they'll sit at a table and take in everybody's credit cards and max out to pay for things, that how so important and probably the most loving thing that any of us can do is the things that you've pointed out today. I would be horrified and go with regrets, leaving my children fighting. I have a son and a daughter, and sons have a harder time cremating their mothers. Daughters have a hard time cremating their fathers, and the arguments, there's different dynamics. And if I left my children with decisions like these without clear, you know, arrangements made, I would have regrets, horrible regrets. And I also could be the cause, indirectly or directly, of my children fighting at a time where they need each other the very most.
How well put that is, really.
So,
I think it's a good place to conclude this topic today. Perhaps with a thought that this, of course, is the bare bones of everything. It's a pun.
I know.
It's a pun. Laugh on cue.
From God's on board, each day I dine. From the Bering Straits to Palestine, this spring, this brook will ring the bell. No need of wealth, you're in God's hotel. Motto, so do the same. Let heaven flow. No pills, no